In this excerpt from the full interview with law professor Michael Bazyler, a Holocaust and genocide restitution attorney and professor who's been cited in Supreme Court cases, he explains the origin of the term genocide and how it's tied directly to the case of Soghomon Tehlirian. Enjoy. The full interview is already up on the site, but I just thought you might enjoy this. But also, don't forget to share, subscribe, and click the notification bell when you want to be notified about other clips that I put up.
Normally in the structure of the other interviews that we've done, I always bring up the topic of Soghomon Tehlirian toward the end, but I think it might be appropriate to introduce him here because, of course, you're familiar with his case. I thought maybe you can offer some comments or perhaps offer your take on Tehlirian and his importance in the area of international human rights law, if that may be the apt way of putting it, and how his case inspired Raphael Lemkin, and maybe we can use that to then talk about the Holocaust litigation cases that were first brought in American courts in the 1990s.
Sure. So Raphael Lemkin, for those of you that don't know, was a Polish Jewish lawyer who lived in Warsaw. Was quite distinguished, went to international conferences before World War II, talking about the need of creating an international crime for which individuals could be responsible for when they commit genocide. He didn't use the word genocide then. He used other names. And when he went to these conferences before the League of Nations and other places, nobody would listen to him. You know, World War I was over, the Great War, the war to end all wars, and but he kept talking about this, and he realized that in these various countries where there are minorities, those minorities were slaughtered in the past, and they could be slaughtered again. And little did he know, in 1939, just like what happened to my father, and when the Germans invaded, Lemkin was an adult. He was in the Polish army. His entire family was murdered except for one brother who also fled to Poland, from Poland to Eastern Poland, like my dad, and survived. But then Lemkin was lucky. He was able to flee Poland, eventually made his way to the United States, taught at Duke University, worked for the US government. And in 1944, he published a book, Axis Rule, AXIS, in occupied Europe. This is the Germans. And what Lemkin had looked at as a lawyer is how the Germans were using the law in the legal systems of other countries in order to prosecute Jews, but the other conquered peoples. And in chapter 9 of that book, he said, what I'm seeing is a crime for which there has to be a name. And he came up with a name. He invented this word, genocide. He put together, from classical Greek, classical Latin, the two words, and genos, which is people from Greek, side, which is murder, like homicide, suicide, and genos, so the killing of a group of people. And that's when the word came into being. When I teach this to my students, they say, oh, they think that this is something that was around since, I don't know, classical Latin or Greek. And they don't realize that word itself did not exist until 1944. And in doing that, Lemkin looked at, and when he was going back to when he was a student in pre-war Poland, he became aware of the Armenian genocide. And he actually questioned his teachers. How could it be that a country, rulers of a country, could decimate the entire population, minority population of his people? And his teacher, his international law professor, said, that's not the concern of international law. A country can do whatever it wants to its people. It's like, if a farmer wants to slaughter his own chickens. And Lemkin's answer was that people are not chickens. You don't have that right. And so he was very much affected by that. He was very much affected by the trial in Berlin that occurred of Soghomon. And so that played an important impact on him. And so when he coined the word genocide, and when he taught about it before the war, he was talking about historical events. When he wrote about it in 1944, he was not just thinking about the Armenians and other victims of mass atrocities, throughout human history, but now his own people, the Jews, who again were being slaughtered. So there's a direct line between the Armenian genocide, and the Holocaust, between Mr. Lemkin, our hero, Mr. Lemkin, to both hero to international law, to the Jewish people, to the Armenian people, and I think to all of humanity.